Hi, my name is Dov Lesel. Today's talk will be about bonds. So the first question is, what is a bond? The technical definition is that a bond is a debt issued by a corporation or a government entity. And so, theoretically, when you as an investor are buying a bond, you are lending money to the corporation or government. However, there's another more direct way, especially tied to the word bond. I am sure most of you have heard the expression, "my word is my bond," or if you get the misfortune of being jailed and you want out, you post a bail bond. These words are similar. There's also James Bond, but that has a completely different meaning. My word is my bond means when I give you my word, it is a promise that I will do what I told you I would do. For a bail bond, you are posting a bond and you are promising the court that you will come back to court. You will be there for your appearance as required by the court. So the question is, why does a corporation or government issue bonds? The historic way of borrowing money is that the borrower would look to a bank or group of individuals or companies or even guilds to take out a loan. However, for that, you needed to find a lender. Now, all of you who might have bought a car or a house know that you take out a mortgage or a loan, and a mortgage is a kind of loan, and you will repay with interest and principal. When, especially in the last couple of 100 years, large corporations required money for their business, governments needed to borrow larger amounts of money. For example, enlarging a zoo, building roads, libraries, or the city hall, or even replacing an aging fleet of trucks with new, more environmental trucks. Instead of paying for that with their cash flow, which may not be enough, they go to the market to borrow money. The nice thing with bonds is that they don't have to borrow all that money from one bank or lender. When you have to go to a lender, number one, the lender may impose many numerous strings and conditions attached to the money that you borrow. Also, as the amount of money grew and the amount of debt needed for new infrastructure, whether by corporations or governments, banks would often feel constrained from lending huge amounts to one borrower because it was risky for the bank. That meant that borrower often had to pay higher interest, and it was a much more difficult process. The bank, let's say a borrower needed $100 million, and the bank might feel uncomfortable lending that amount because it was a large amount perhaps for the bank, but also once the bank made the loan, if it needed to sell the loan, it needed to find another lender or bank to buy the loan. All of this made raising money and operating, whether a government entity or corporation, more difficult. And so enter the concept of the bond. In our example of $100 million loan, what the borrower would do is meet with their advisors and form a bond issue for that 100 million that would be made up of bonds of various maturities. So some of the bonds might be short-term, let's say due in 6 or 8 years. Some may be intermediate, due in 15 or 20 years, and others long-term for 25 or 30 years, or even longer. The longer the maturity of the bond, the higher the interest rate that the borrower would have to pay. So there was an advantage in issuing bonds of various maturities, because the shorter the maturity, the lower the interest rate cost to the issuer. Now, in a regular debt situation, you have a borrower and a lender. For bonds, the language is somewhat different. The borrower is called the issuer because they issue bonds. The lender, which could be you, are known as a bond buyer or a bond holder. There is no difference, except that you don't have a direct relationship with the borrower. Most bonds are bought and sold on the secondary market. So instead of deciding to lend directly to a company and having to do research on whether the company has the ability and stability to pay the interest and principal when due, you will rely, when you buy the bond, on other factors. Secondly, bonds are relatively easy to buy and sell, not as easy as stocks, which can now be purchased with a click of a mouse. Bonds need to be bought through a bond broker. However, most bonds are rated by one of the 3 major U.S. rating agencies, and they are given ratings ranging from a high of AAA to a low of junk. The higher the rating, the safer the bond. Theoretically, the less risk is involved, and the lower the rating, the higher the interest rate, to compensate the bondholder for the risk incurred in return for that extra interest. In the next talk, we will discuss some of the things you need to know before buying a bond. Thank you.